So let's start with you. You had mentioned if you were a character from a book, you'd be Samwise Gamgee, and at the same time you're a lawyer and a fiction writer. How do you see yourself as Samwise Gamgee?
Well, I wish I was Samwise Gamgee. Samwise is loyal and just wonderful all around, right? There's nothing negative about Samwise, but he is the faithful servant to his master, and to me, perhaps the ideal character, in the Lord of the Rings, which was basically my favorite book growing up. And I just admire his integrity and his loyalty to Frodo and his willingness to do whatever it takes to complete the mission, which is sort of similar to my military background in the Air Force, right? Mission accomplishment.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, welcome, friends, to Legendmakers. Today we are joined by Antony Kolenc. Am I pronouncing it right?
Absolutely.
Antony is a law professor, a retired Air Force officer, and author of multiple books and articles, as well as a fiction series for teens from Loyola Press. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see it over his shoulder. The medieval series, the Harwood Mysteries. It has 4 books. It's won 8 book awards. You've got a new one coming out, and I imagine you're in the middle of all of that promotion and talking about that. So let's start at the beginning. I want to hear a little bit of your origin story and how somebody goes through all that, has a penchant for law, and then goes and writes medieval historical fiction. Like, what is that origin story, Antony?
I grew up in New Jersey, and as a teenager, like so many of us writers, I always wanted to write. I was writing horrible knockoffs of The Lord of the Rings and Raiders of the Lost Ark and Star Wars as a teenager. In fact, I still have them saved in the attic somewhere, handwritten in some binder or something. But they were absolutely horrible. But, I went on and joined the Air Force pretty young. Started as an enlisted firefighter, eventually became an officer when I finished my degree. And then the Air Force actually sent me to law school. And so I went to the University of Florida College of Law in Gainesville and was a JAG officer in the Air Force for the rest of my career, about 21 and a half years. Along the way, I'm married with 5 kids and 2 grandkids. And all this time I was writing in the background. We were also a homeschooling family. And so the series that actually finally got written, like so many of us, I think we write stuff as we're growing up, and then like we all want to write novels, and I get like 100 page into the novel, and then I stop because I would lose interest, or it was just bad, or whatever. You probably have a few of those in your drawer too, like most of us. But
no comment there. But keep going.
but anyway, so yeah, I mean, while I was writing as a lawyer, a bunch of nonfiction, I've got a lot of articles written. I do a legal column for a Practical Homeschooling magazine. I've got a case book that we use in law school to teach evidence. But I've always wanted to keep kind of writing fiction, and I don't know, it was just that storytelling part of us, and so yeah, that's I finally got it done after a long time.
That's brilliant. I really want to ask about that process and so on. You're a dad, you're homeschooling, you're busy, you've got career, and you're pumping out. Air quotes, pumping out, putting out novels here. And I do want to ask about the latest one. When has that one landed, or is it in the launch phase, or when is the announcement date for that?
Well, this little baby right here is book 4, The
Beautiful
Merchant's
looking
Curse. Loyola Press does a beautiful job on all of the artwork on these covers. I'll show you the other ones as we go along. But that one is actually releasing October 17th is our official launch date. Going to have a fun Facebook Live launch. Maybe you could join me. I'll shoot some ads out on that. But this is the 4th in the series, and I am very, very thrilled. This is actually my favorite of the 4 of them so far.
Okay, well, let's start at the beginning. What is the Harwood Mysteries, and how does book 1 begin?
All right, so the Harwood Mysteries is a medieval historical fiction series for teens aged 10 and up. I wrote it, as I mentioned, I was a homeschooling family. My son was about 12 when I started writing book 1, Shadow in the Dark, and that was a long time ago. It has been a long journey for the Harwood Mysteries. And books 1, 2, and 3, I actually had written probably 8-10 years ago. All 3 of them were done. and finally, after a few false starts, Loyola Press came along and just made it all come true. Since we were talking about these beautiful covers, I'll show you. Shadow in the Dark was book one, came out in July of 2020. My main character is Zan, short for Alexander, and he's basically an orphan boy who winds up at a Benedictine abbey in 12th century England. And he winds up being raised by the monks after his family's village gets attacked by bandits. And so the main mystery in that one is he's got to figure out, what is this, spooky kind of angel of death, shadowy figure roaming around on the abbey grounds. At the same time, we've got bandits attacking the abbey. They attacked his manor. He's just a poor serf boy who, it's not like he came from anything. And and of course he has a partner in crime, Lucy, a little girl at the convent whose dad dropped her off as he's traveling around England with his landlord. And so the two of them kind of are solving this mystery. So it's historical fiction. It really introduces people to 12th century England, monastic life, to the feudal system. Loyola has done a great job putting together like some curriculum companions and things that you can use with, homeschooling or with a Catholic school curriculum in the Middle Ages. So I meant for it, although it's fiction, I meant for it to be able to really, demonstrate kind of what life in an abbey would have been like. And so you see a lot of that going on while all this kind of spooky mystery stuff is going on.
Yeah.
So that was the first one.
Let's just pause there for a second. If you were to think of, I don't know, maybe two movies that people have seen, it could be like, this book is a combo of this and this.
I always think of, especially book one, as Harry Potter meets Brother Cadfael. And those of you who are not familiar,
where I was thinking it was going.
In fact, it's the same basic period as Brother Cadfael, the herbalist monk who solves all these mysteries. And was a very popular series of books way back when. I think they made a BBC series of it. So it's kind of like that idea. But
That's brilliant.
I wanted it to be, something that would be very accessible to, 10 and up, teenagers, in kind of the Harry Potter generation. And so I wrote it.
What's the feel, the vibe of the book?
It's very kind of spooky, actually. There's some spookiness in it. There's, but the book, and actually the whole series, is about vocation, though. It's really like a coming of age story. What does God want us to do in our lives? And Zan and Lucy get, confronted with several different situations, and always in the background is, what does God want for me in my life? So there are some religious themes that are running through the series, which is easy to do because it takes place at an abbey in a lot of the books. And, he's got Brother Andrew as his mentor. Sister Regina is one of the nuns who's just very wise nun.
So this is like a merged monastic convent. There's like both men and women.
Well, yeah. So it's a Benedictine abbey, but there's also a nunnery sort of co-located, separated, where an abbess is in charge. Now, at this time in history, that sort of wasn't the going thing. Most of the time, that wouldn't happen. It happened, on rare occasions. But this is one of those occasions.
There you go. Why did you pick Benedictine spirituality versus any of the other orders? Was there something that spoke to you?
The black robes really spoke to me.
There you go.
No, the Benedictines really can be credited, I think, with saving much of Western civilization and art and culture through the Middle Ages. And this is about 100 years into the Cistercian reforms of the Benedictine order, and he's sort of at a reformed Benedictine abbey, if you will, that's been influenced by those Cistercian reforms, but. I like the black robes for sure, for the vibe of having kind of the black robes, but also I think the Benedictines deserve a lot of credit for so many hundreds of years where they were the monastic order that was really preserving Western life during the Dark Ages, really, and so there you go.
Yeah, there's a specific the specific community intent, and they're more academic than Franciscans. Am I right? Less academic than perhaps Dominicans or Jesuits.
Right, and of course, at this time there were no Franciscans or
There
Dominicans
you
or
go.
Jesuits. So we have basically the we have the Benedictines. There's Augustinian, Augustinians, and there's the Cistercian order that has come up. Those are really, I mean, there's some minor other orders that are out there, but the Benedictines still were sort of the dominant. At this time. And the other thing about it, the reason I also picked it is because the Benedictines were also kind of corrupted at this time and were coming out of a corrupt period, which is why the Cistercians, were such a successful reform order. And so it also gave me the opportunity to sort of, show that, not everything is perfect in the world, in the church, in the monastic orders.
No, it's beautiful to be open, excuse me, to that historical tension. It's very easy to idealize the past. So let's move on to book 2 then. And
Yes.
you want to take us through some of the other books here?
Absolutely. So book 2 was one of my favorites until book 4 just came out. It's the Haunted Cathedral. And in this one, Zan and Lucy wind up in Lincoln, England, which is a few days' journey from Yorkshire, where the abbey is located. And through a series of events that I won't bore you with at the moment, but they're very exciting events, Zan winds up in Lincoln, actually at Lincoln Cathedral. And this again takes place in 1185 AD. And there is a major historical event that occurs in Lincoln in 1185 AD that is sort of the climax of the book. And so I really wanted Zan to be there when it happened. So Lincoln Cathedral, you'd recognize it. Well, you might not recognize it, but it's one of the most popular cathedrals today. They actually filmed the Da Vinci Code in Lincoln Cathedral. But that is the old Lincoln. I mean, the one I'm talking about here is the predecessor to the current Lincoln Cathedral, because this is 1,000 years ago, and there's only pieces of the old and the new now. And so Lincoln, though, is a very popular tourist area. I got to visit England. I actually went on what I called my Zan research tour, which is just
how cool.
another name for a boondoggle. I was teaching. I'm a law professor, so I was teaching in France one summer for my law school, and I was like, I've never been to England, and I've written these books, or I'm in the process of writing them. I need to go check these places out. So I pretended like I was in college and went, journeying around with a train pass and staying in hostels and just checking out all the different areas in England where my books take place.
What did that open up for your novel?
Well, I took a lot of pictures, and that way I could go back and actually look at some of these places. Of course, it was 1,000 years ago, so things have changed. But some of the buildings, like Lincoln Castle, is still standing. So but it gave me just also the sense of presence, of place, of being,
the feeling
there.
of the area.
Yeah, and it was just a lot of fun. I mean, I was by myself, so it was limited fun, but it was pretty neat to do. So anyway,
that's a cool idea. It would be like a pilgrimage tour of England following Zan's journeys.
Exactly. That's kind of what I was doing at the time. So book 2, by the way, book 1 is kind of about suffering and like, why do bad things happen to good people? That's sort of kind of the theme, suffering and death, this angel of death figure that's there. Book 2 is about forgiveness, because Zan winds up coming, up close and personal with the bandits who attacked his village. And he has to, determine, is he going to forgive? And that's so that's a big theme in book 2. But it's called the Haunted Cathedral because the cathedral is rumored to be haunted by the ghost of a little girl. And so that's kind of the spooky mystery in book 2 is the cathedral haunted, and what's going on in the cathedral, and then this major event that takes place. So that's book 2. I can continue.
Carry on. What's
All right,
book 3?
book 3 is the Fire of Eden, and this Gandalf-looking figure is kind of the spooky magician who lives near a priory where Zan travels to when his mentor, Brother Andrew, is getting ordained a priest. They wind up having, through a series of events, which I won't bore you with right now, they wind up having to travel to Grenton Priory. And outside of the priory, this magician kind of lives, and there's kind of robbers in the woodland and this kind of thing. And Brother Andrew, he comes from a rich family, and his mom, you know, through a series of events, brings this priceless, maybe it's not priceless, but it's a really valuable ruby known as Eden's Fire. And on the eve of Brother Andrew's ordination, the ruby is stolen right from under everybody's eyes. And Zan has to sort of figure out who stole this jewel. Is it this spooky magician? Is it a corrupt Benedictine monk? Is it some bandits out in the woodland or something else? And so that's kind of, and the theme of the third book is pride. It's really all about pride and humility. Zan gets a little full of himself after all of his success in the first two books, and I think he needs to be taken down a few notches in book three. And Lucy is glad to help him with that.
Gotcha.
So yeah, so that's
what was the theme of the second book? Because you had mentioned
Forgiveness.
Suffering and Death for the first. Forgiveness.
Forgiveness. Yeah. So each book takes on a separate theme. And then, so now my new favorite is the one that just is releasing, The Merchant's Curse, where Zan winds up back in Lincoln. He's now living with his uncle, who's a merchant there. That was one of the questions that have to be resolved in book three, which I won't, well, it's too late, I spoiled it, but I won't say anything else. But so
you heard it here first, folks.
He's in Lincoln, and by the way, there's another female character. I wanted there to be some really strong female characters so that the series would be not just for boys, but for girls too. And this other girl, Lucy's a very holy girl. She's at the convent. She's very prayerful. She's sort of like Zan's conscience. And she's debating whether to go to the nunnery herself and become a nun or not. But Christina is the girl he meets in book two in Lincoln. She's kind of a redheaded, firebrand who is very saucy to Zan and really puts him in his place. And she sort of is our main girl character in book four, because Zan spends all of book four in Lincoln. And book four is actually about my favorite book in the Old Testament, Ecclesiastes. I love the book of Ecclesiastes. And what I actually did with book four, the theme is vanity, because of course Ecclesiastes is all about vanity of vanities and all the vanities of life that people cling to that don't actually bring them, salvation in the end and can save them from, the things that hurt us. And so, so what I actually did, which I hadn't done in the other books, is I sort of took Ecclesiastes and made my book sort of a case study of the book of Ecclesiastes. If you're very familiar with the book of Ecclesiastes, you will hear its words, feel its vibes, and see it quoted all throughout the book, coming out of the dialogue of some of the characters' mouths. Zan is studying Ecclesiastes because his mentor, Brother Andrew, sends him, a parchment that has Ecclesiastes on it. Zan wants to become wise, is what's going on, and so on the way he is. But none of this has to do with the main plot. The main plot is the spooky witchy woman curses the business partner of Zan's uncle, and it appears that he's been cursed and is dying. And now Zan has to try to figure out, is this a witch? Is she cursing him? How do I save him from this curse? And it gets very intense. It's probably, like I said, my favorite of the four books, maybe because I love Ecclesiastes so much, but there's a lot going on in this book.
Does it still have that Cadfael Potter vibe all the way through the series, or has it started to change a little?
The whole series does that. I really, and you can see there's a lot of continuity. It's a continuing story. In theory, each book could be read independently. I wrote it so that you could kind of catch up on the backstory, but why would you want to, right? You'd want to start with book one and work your way to book four.
So what inspired this? Well, first I should ask, do you plan to continue, or is it now a tidy quartet?
Never tidy. Book five is already at Loyola Press for them to start editing. And I'm planning book six. We haven't signed the contract yet. And if the series, really takes off, maybe there'll be a book 7, 8, and 9, because what I've been working towards, and you'll see it in each book, 1189 is the beginning of the Third Crusade in the Holy Land. Saladin has taken back Jerusalem in 1187, and So the books start in 1184, and by the time we get to the Merchant's Curse, we're in 1186. We're seeing some history where King Henry II's sons, Richard the Lionheart, and some of his other sons are kind of rebelling against him, and aligning themselves with France. And you've got all this kind of intrigue. In fact, there's a whole subplot about whether Zan is a traitor to the king and whether he's going to get hung as a traitor to King Henry II in the Merchant's Curse. But all of this is building up to what I was thinking of was a final trilogy, if you will, 7, 8, and 9, during the Third Crusade, where Zan is actually in the Holy Land. Because he starts in book 1 at age 11, and by the time I get to 1189, he'll be basically 17, 18 years old, prime age to be in the Third Crusade.
And every book it's a whodunit. Every book is a mystery, hence the title.
Yeah, there's definitely a mystery element and a spooky element in each of the books.
Okay, why is that? And I'm intrigued. What was the inspiration for the story and for Zan's character, and why this regular recurring theme of spookiness? What is it that interests you about that?
Well, because I think that's just the brand of and I wanted it to be like I said, Harry Potter meets Brother Cadfael. I mean, that says it all, right? I wanted it to be something that, teenagers would want to read it. They would think, hey, this is kind of, spooky. So in fact, Loyola's releasing these around Halloween. Hey, it's a great, spooky, good, Christian, clean read, but it's also for, you could, pitch it during the Halloween season. Some of the books take place, like book 2 takes place during Lent. It's actually a really good Lenten book too, because there's a lot of discussion about Lent in there. But I wanted it to be very accessible to today's teenagers. And what's more accessible than spooky mysteries to our kids today? If you look at what are they watching? It's all these really dark, witches and vampires and, all of that, Harry Potter and wizards. And, I wanted there to be an alternative to that. That would be good, clean Christian fiction that wasn't just so squeaky clean and predictable that nobody would actually want to watch it today, or read it today,
That's something that we love at LegendFiction, the community that we're putting together, is this sense that you don't have to shoehorn, or you shouldn't feel like you're shoehorning the faith into what you're writing, but the idea that there's a contact with the numinous, with the spiritual, and it's not always comfortable, it's not always safe. Aslan's not a tame lion. That's something that that's why we usually refer to dragons a lot, because they're part of that interworld between the purely angelic and the purely material, and they sort of stride that line. Your favorite legend or story that you have had growing up, something that perhaps you'd like to come back to and ruminate or mull on?
Well, of course, I grew up reading The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. Actually, I went to an all-boy Catholic high school, Don Bosco Technical High School in Paterson, New Jersey. The Salesians, the Salesian brothers were there. And actually, that was our sophomore book to read in our English literature class, was The Hobbit. And so that was the first time I was exposed, actually. I think I hadn't read any Tolkien before then. And I really got into, the Legend of Tolkien. I'm really enjoying the Rings of Power now that, it's been remade and everything. Yeah. The other legend is King Arthur, yes. And in fact, is it book 4 or 5? No, it's book 5. There's a few, references I make to some of the Arthurian knights, because the legend of King Arthur goes way back. And even in 12th century England, there was familiarity with some of these Arthurian stories. So that's the other, maybe that's why I kind of like the medieval feel too, because I kind of liked King Arthur growing up also.
Oh, we grew up huge medieval fans. It was like ancient Egypt, medieval Britain, King Arthur and Robin Hood, Sean Connery and First Knight was like he's my King Arthur.
There you go.
I want to ask about world building now, and obviously there's historical research that's going into this, but then there's the point where you're then developing your own world, and I guess knowing where to stop and then how to be creative and add your own elements to it. How have you handled that? How has that been for you?
Yeah, that was really challenging because I'm not like a medieval monastic expert in England. I did consult a medieval monastic expert in England from Catholic University, however.
Okay.
Dr. Jennifer Paxton, especially on the first book, helped me with the world building because as much research as you can do, you never can really get all the details right. Because anybody who knows like can point out like, oh, well, there's this, that, and the other thing, and you're like, oh, I thought I researched this to death. So she helped me a lot to try to get some of the fine points on, but like even the point you brought up about, so there, two, an abbey and an abbess on the same property. That is unusual. It's not unheard of, but it was unusual. And so there is a little bit of kind of that, it's historical fiction, it's heavier on the fiction than on the history, I would say. But I wanted to get, especially in book one, I really wanted to get the world building to, give a teenager a sense of the world that Zan would have grown up in as a serf boy at a Benedictine abbey. I forgot to mention this. He also has amnesia for the entirety of book one. Because he starts off with the attack. So you kind of also are trying to figure out who is he, where is his family, and all this kind of thing. So that does recover at the end of the book. But anyway, so the world building has been interesting. Like I set it at a fictional abbey. Books 2 and 4 take place in Lincoln. And I tried to, be as true as I could to all the research I could find on Lincoln. And the history of Lincoln Cathedral is fascinating and kind of spooky. It's got a spooky history itself. And so, I tried to like tap into that. And, but yeah, the world building at some point I've created sort of, in fact, not just created it, but Loyola has made it. Zan's World, right? That's ultimately what I've done here. They have these maps that they put together for each book, and each book kind of highlights something different. But at the end of the day, it really is Zan's World because, yes, it's historical 12th century England, but it's sort of my Zan version of it to some extent.
So for those who are watching or listening to the podcast, Antony just held up a hand-drawn map of the world that Zan inhabits. I want to ask you about compelling characterization. How do you make a character that, I'm assuming your own kids have read this and other people have, told you how much they enjoy the character and you yourself like following him through these adventures. How have you kept him feeling real and fresh, perhaps even challenging you as he works through the 4 novels and now perhaps looking towards 9? How do you keep him feeling compelling and not becoming stale?
Yeah, Zan he's a kid and he's a flawed character. He's a good kid. I mean, he just has a good heart. So he's not a flawed character like we see today with the anti-hero. Everywhere you go, everything's an anti-hero. He's not an anti-hero. But he's not a perfect kid. And when you see what happens to him, you can understand why he wouldn't want to forgive the bandit who burned down his village, no matter how repentant the bandit was. And so in each book, and then you also can understand why he'd get prideful, after having so much success. And so, I just want him to be human. And you're right. At some point, it's like, well, gosh, how many of the vices could this kid go through? But we all go through.
Maybe a better question that's just occurred is, how does your character resist you as the author?
How does he resist me?
Yeah.
Partly he probably learns from his mistakes, but whereas maybe I don't. No, he has to be his own person. And when you write, this as an author, at some point, if you look at all your characters, you're like, well, that's kind of a little bit like me, and that's kind of a little bit like me. Like Sister Regina, yeah, she kind of is a little bit like me sometimes. And so you find yourself in all the characters to some extent, but they each have to have their individual personalities. Zan, I don't know how much he is like me, actually, but... but I do try to keep him, because I'm also working with Lucy and Christina, especially. Those are kind of the 3 main characters. They all have to have sort of their own, individual identity. And honestly, I think I like Christina the most. She's the spunkiest. She's got a lot of one-liners that put Zan in his place and things like that. Um, so I don't know. I guess I try to just keep them true. Like, what would Zan actually do if he were confronted with this? And after, I've been living with these books now for 15 years at least, going on 20
Yeah.
years probably. And so to some extent, at this point, I actually can write the next installment knowing kind of a sense of, well, this is the way Christina would respond. This is the way Lucy would respond. This is the way Zan would
Yeah.
respond. And I think, the readers will see that too,
Mhm.
a lot of times.
Brilliant, brilliant. Um, as we start to wrap up here, now that you're 5 books in now, one is at the printer, launching the fourth here. What would you say is the number one thing that you have learned? Well, maybe about yourself, but about the writing process and about creating all of this.
So what I learned up front was it's a very different form of art to write fiction than it was to write legal briefs, case books, magazine articles, a lot of the nonfiction I was writing. I always considered myself to be a good writer, but
Mhm.
being a fiction author has been a very humbling experience. And I joined the Catholic Writers Guild, which is I encourage anybody who's interested in writing to network and join that. And
Mhm.
I joined that. Gosh, that's got to be 15 years ago now. And I think it's when I started really fellowshipping and networking with more established authors who knew what they were doing and could help me, sort of mentor me through those. Even though I'd been writing fiction my whole life to some extent, I didn't know what I was doing. And Loyola Press was actually really good with this too, because they hired some developmental editors to work with me when they first picked up the series. That was really helpful. So I guess what I found is, I got to be humble. It's hard to be humble, right? So I had to learn to be humble by realizing, you know what, you've got a lot to learn in this new craft, and that's okay. We all have a
Mhm.
lot to learn, in this new craft. The other thing I guess I really learned was that God is in control. I got the contract with Loyola Press. It just fell into my lap after 10 years of me banging my head and trying to get everything done. Basically, at one of these Writers Guild conferences, Joe Durapos, the acquisitions editor at Loyola Press, happened to be there. I happened to be at a lunch with him. He happened to be saying something, and I happened to have the trilogy ready to go in a former form. And it just fell into my lap. And I'm like, well, I guess it's all in God's time. We work, it's like that vanity of vanities theme from Ecclesiastes. You could work all day long, but at the end of the day, if God is not wanting it to happen, it's not ready
Mhm.
yet. And that's also been humbling because I like to think that, what I do, will make it or break it. And that's actually not the way that it's turned out.
Gotcha. Wonderful. Well, as we wrap up here, how can people get in touch with you? How can they find you online?
Well, you can go to my website, antonykolenc.com, ANTONYKOLENC.com. I also have another one just for the series, the HarwoodMysteries.com. Of course, Loyola it has a lot on there. And if you're going to buy the book, I would always encourage you to go to your local bookstore first and see if they can order it for you, stock it on their shelves, help the mom and pops, save them from Amazon. But if you don't want to do that, or you're too lazy like I am, then go to Amazon and get it. Or christianbook.com or something like that. You can find it. You can find it just about anywhere. And
Brilliant.
I also want to mention I also have a podcast that I've been doing. This is my second season now. It's called The
Yes.
Shepherd's Pie, and its focus is on raising faithful kids. And so I sort of, I interview a different guest like you do every week. It's an ecumenical show. I have Protestant and Catholic guests, and we talk about all different issues that impact youth. A lot of them are authors, so we often are talking about fiction that is written for youth,
Mhm.
because as you know, we explore all different themes in our fiction, and we usually are exploring themes that can benefit youth. So check that out too.
Wonderful.
You can find that on my website.
Fantastic. Well, in a second, I'm going to ask you to wrap with your 1 minute message to authors everywhere. First, for those who have not heard of Legend Fiction before, briefly, it is the creative community for modern Catholic and Orthodox authors. It's all about discovering new worlds, supporting your favorite authors, sharing your works in progress. You can share your stories for free or join our private community once you're on the inside. It's all about giving and getting feedback, sharing your works in progress, growing your writing portfolio and your writing network, and generally just having a lot of fun because there's always a lot going on. Check us out at legendfiction.com. Antony, if you had 1 minute to share a word of encouragement to other authors, whether teens or adults, veterans or new, what would you like to say?
Number one, don't be discouraged. This is a learning process. Have thick skin because if you're going to learn, you're going to have to hear feedback that sometimes you don't like. Network with people like Legend Fiction or the Catholic Writers Guild or all these folks who are out there who are there to help you succeed, and ultimately realize at the end of the day, it's in God's hands, right? The prayer that I've been praying the most the last year is, Jesus, I trust in you. I just have to always stop and remember that. And I think if you're especially if you're a Christian author, no matter what you're writing, you should want God on your side. So, Jesus, I trust in you.